What if I told you that you probably committed at least 3 federal crimes before lunch today? And I'm not talking about jaywalking or speeding. I'm talking about serious federal offenses that could land you in prison for years. The average American unknowingly breaks multiple federal laws every single day. And the scariest part is that ignorance of the law is never a defense. If you're new here, I break down the most shocking truths about American law that they don't teach you in school. And I post new content every single day. So make sure to hit that subscribe button because today's topic is going to blow your mind. Let's start with something you probably did this morning without thinking twice about it. Did you check your email? Congratulations. You might have just committed a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This law is so broadly written that simply reading someone's email without authorization, even if it's your spouse's or your child's, technically qualifies as unauthorized access to a computer system. The penalties can include up to 20 years in federal prison. But it gets worse. If you've ever used someone else's Netflix password, even with their permission, you've technically violated this same federal law. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that using someone else's login credentials, even with permission, can still constitute unauthorized access if it violates the terms of service. So every time you log into your friend's streaming account, you're risking federal prosecution. Now let's talk about something even more common that you definitely did today. You threw something away, right? Well, depending on what you threw away and where you threw it, you might have violated the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. This federal law regulates the disposal of hazardous waste, and the definition of hazardous waste is much broader than you think. That old cell phone battery you tossed in the regular trash, that's hazardous waste. The penalty for improper disposal of hazardous waste can include up to 5 years in prison and fines up to $50,000 per day of violation. And here's the kicker. The law doesn't require intent. You don't have to know it's hazardous waste for it to be a crime. But we're just getting started. Have you ever downloaded a song, movie, or software without paying for it? Even if you did it 20 years ago, there's no statute of limitations on criminal copyright infringement. Under the No Electronic Theft Act, downloading copyrighted material worth more than $1,000 within a 180-day period is a felony punishable by up to 3 years in prison. And the value isn't what you paid for it, it's the retail value. So if you downloaded 10 songs at $1.29 each on iTunes, you've already crossed into misdemeanor territory. Download an entire album worth $15 and you're looking at potential felony charges. The crazy part is that this law was written in 1997, before streaming services existed, but it still applies to modern file sharing. Now let's talk about something that might shock you even more. Have you ever lied on the internet? I'm not talking about catfishing or fraud. I'm talking about any lie, no matter how small. Under federal wire fraud statutes, lying in electronic communications can constitute fraud if it's done to obtain something of value. This includes lying on dating profiles, inflating your resume on LinkedIn, or even fibbing about your age on social media. The key is whether you obtained something of value through the lie, and courts have interpreted something of value very broadly. Getting a job interview because you lied on your resume, that's potentially wire fraud. Getting a date because you lied about your height on Tinder, that could technically qualify too. The penalties for wire fraud include up to 20 years in federal prison. But here's where it gets really scary. Have you ever used a fake name online? Even using a pseudonym or nickname can violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act if the website's terms of service require you to use your real name. Facebook's terms of service, for example, require users to use their real names. So every time someone creates a fake Facebook profile, they're technically committing a federal crime. The same applies to creating multiple accounts on platforms that prohibit it. If you've ever made a second Instagram account to follow your ex, you've violated federal law. Now let's talk about something that affects almost everyone with a job. Have you ever done personal tasks during work hours? Checking your personal email, browsing social media, or even reading the news on your work computer can constitute theft of honest services fraud. This federal law criminalizes depriving an employer of the honest services of an employee. Courts have ruled that using company time and resources for personal activities can qualify as honest services fraud, punishable by up to 20 years in prison. And it doesn't matter if your boss doesn't care, or if everyone else does it too. The law is the law. But wait, there's more. Have you ever taken office supplies home from work? Even a single pen or piece of paper can constitute federal theft if your workplace receives federal funding. Under federal law, stealing anything worth more than $5 from an organization that receives federal funds is a crime. Since most major employers receive some form of federal funding, whether through contracts, grants, or tax incentives, taking that pen home could technically make you a federal criminal. The penalty is up to 10 years in prison. Now let's talk about something that happens in almost every American household. Have you ever opened mail that wasn't addressed to you? Even if it's your spouse's mail or your adult child's mail delivered to your house, opening it without permission is a federal crime under the mail theft statute. The penalty is up to 5 years in prison. This law is so strict that even opening mail addressed to the previous tenant of your apartment can result in federal charges. And here's something that might surprise you about taxes. Have you ever paid someone in cash for services without reporting it? If you paid your babysitter, housekeeper, or handyman more than $600 in cash during the year and didn't file a 1099 form, you've committed tax fraud. The penalty for failing to file required tax forms can include up to 1 year in prison and fines up to $25,000. But most people have no idea this requirement even exists. Let's talk about something even more common. Have you ever given someone prescription medication? Even giving your spouse one of your prescription painkillers is a federal crime under the Controlled Substances Act. The penalty for distributing prescription drugs without a license can include up to 20 years in prison, and it doesn't matter if the person needed the medication or if you were trying to help. The law makes no exceptions for good intentions. Here's another one that affects almost everyone. Have you ever driven with an expired registration or inspection sticker? While this might seem like a simple traffic violation, if you cross state lines with expired registration, it becomes a federal crime under interstate commerce laws. The penalty can include up to 6 months in federal prison. Now let's talk about something that affects anyone who's ever moved. Have you ever thrown away mail addressed to someone else? Even mail addressed to the previous resident of your home must be returned to the Postal Service. Throwing it away is mail theft, a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The law requires you to either forward it to the correct address or return it to the post office marked "not at this address." Simply throwing it in the trash makes you a federal criminal. But here's where it gets really absurd. Have you ever sung "Happy Birthday" in public? Until 2016, "Happy Birthday to You" was under copyright protection, and singing it in public without paying royalties was technically copyright infringement. While the song is now in the public domain, there are thousands of other songs that are still protected, and singing them in public without permission can result in federal charges. The penalty for criminal copyright infringement is up to 5 years in prison. Let's talk about something that affects pet owners. Have you ever walked your dog without a leash on federal property? National parks, federal buildings, and other federal property have strict leash laws, and violating them is a federal crime. The penalty can include up to 6 months in prison and fines up to $1,000. And here's something that might shock parents. Have you ever let your child use your streaming account? If your child is away at college and using your Netflix account, you might be violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Most streaming services' terms of service restrict account sharing to members of the same household. Allowing someone outside your household to use your account, even your own child, can constitute unauthorized access to a computer system. Now, let's talk about something that affects anyone who's ever been to a bar or restaurant. Have you ever taken a drink outside the establishment? In many jurisdictions, leaving a bar or restaurant with an alcoholic beverage, even if you paid for it, is a federal crime if the establishment is located on federal property or receives federal funding. The penalty can include up to 1 year in prison. Here's another one that affects travelers. Have you ever packed prescription medication in someone else's luggage? Even if it's your spouse's suitcase and your own medication, this violates federal transportation of controlled substances laws. The penalty can include up to 4 years in prison. Let's talk about something that affects anyone who's ever helped a friend move. Have you ever transported someone else's belongings across state lines without knowing exactly what was in every box? If any of those belongings turn out to be illegal or regulated items, you can be charged with interstate transportation of illegal goods, even if you had no knowledge of what was in the boxes. The penalty can include up to 10 years in prison. But here's the most shocking part of all of this. Federal prosecutors have what's called prosecutorial discretion, which means they can choose whether or not to prosecute these crimes. But that discretion can be influenced by politics, public pressure, or simply a prosecutor's mood on any given day. The fact that you're technically committing federal crimes every day means that if someone powerful wants you prosecuted, they can probably find a way to do it. This is why some legal scholars argue that the average American commits 3 felonies a day without knowing it. The Federal Criminal Code has grown so large and complex that nobody can possibly know all the laws, let alone follow them. And remember, ignorance of the law is never a defense. You can be prosecuted for violating laws you didn't even know existed. So what can you do to protect yourself? First, be aware that these laws exist and try to avoid the most obvious violations. Second, if you're ever investigated or contacted by federal law enforcement, exercise your right to remain silent and contact an attorney immediately. And third, stay informed about changes to federal law by subscribing to channels like this one, where we break down complex legal issues in simple terms. Speaking of subscribing, if this video opened your eyes to how complex and dangerous our legal system has become, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We post new content about shocking legal truths every single day, and tomorrow's video is going to expose how the government can legally take your property without ever charging you with a crime. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. The reality is that our legal system has become so complex that being a law-abiding citizen is nearly impossible. But knowledge is power, and the more you understand about these laws, the better you can protect yourself and your family. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video, where we dive even deeper into the legal system that affects all of our lives.